the somatic inquiry is really where the action is, I think. So much of practice is learning how to get comfortable with discomfort, I think. What would this be if I wasn't here? Seriousness is a crime in the court of God. It's a little more than slightly demented now.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining the Integral Yoga Podcast. Today I am honored to be joined by Jonathan Foust, who is a guiding teacher with the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and a founder of the Meditation Teacher Training Institute in Washington. He's a senior teacher and former president of Kripalu Center. He leads retreats, trainings, and classes in the Washington, D.C. area and around the country, and works individually with those interested in healing and spiritual awakening. He lives outside of Washington, D.C. with his wife, Tara Brach, and their slightly demented dog. So Jonathan, thanks so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you. It's really, really good to have this time with you. I do need to correct one thing there is that the dog is a little more than slightly demented now.
Is he still around though?
She's hanging in there. She's hanging in there. Oh, yeah.
Has that been difficult to watch? The progression?
No, it's fascinating. It's something, as we age, one of the great things about having animals in your life is you get to watch the lifespan, as hard and challenging and painful as that is. But, now as an older guy and having had multiple canine companions over life, there's this very interesting balance of the deep care and the understanding of impermanence. So there's a real sweetness to being with her now. She's deaf and has trouble getting up and down stairs, and she's still having a great time. So, yeah. This
impermanence, I find it to be one of the more challenging aspects of being alive. That things change and we can't hold on to the way that they were, and we have no idea what's to come. Is that challenging for you as well, the impermanence?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, through the lens of Buddhist, psychology or Buddhist philosophy, it's the first law of reality, is that anything born of causes and conditions is subject to change. And when I remember that, everything's fine. It's when I don't, and then there's the resistance, and then there's the rope burn and the stress and the suffering. It all comes in relationship to what's changing and how we're relating to it.
So I'm curious if gratitude is a way to kind of, I don't want to say deal with the impermanence, but maybe it is to kind of deal with the impermanence. I think that's how I do it in my mind. And it's been a huge change in my life since I would say I discovered the practice of gratitude when I realized that, wow, I'm not owed anything. I'm not owed a certain amount of time or experiences or anything like that. I'm so thankful for the amount that I've had. Therefore, I can accept the impermanence a lot better. If I didn't have that gratitude, then I think it would be more challenging for me to do that.
Yeah, I think there are two approaches. I mean, one is to go in with gratitude, which is the best and most profound state changer there is. The other lens is just to really reflect on impermanence. And when I just sort of sit with impermanence, and I sit with my deaf, cute little dog, and realize that her time here is out of my control, then the byproduct is gratitude. Then there's just this explosion of, well, then all I have is now. And then it's almost an ecstatic experience when I can really track the fact of impermanence all the way through. So whether it's gratitude going in, it'll be gratitude going out if you hang in there with the reality of impermanence.
I love that, because it's almost like I feel like that's what nature is teaching us to do. Like nature wants us to discover gratitude. It's like, oh, we'll give you all of these things. Like you want to say thank you. You want to say thank you.
Yeah. I remember hanging out with someone and we were just we were like saying grace before a meal, and he just casually commented. He said, wouldn't you say like the highest prayer is thank you? And it was so simple but so profound that when we are in that state of thank you for this moment, it really does change things.
Yeah, for me too. And it does feel like the highest prayer. I also have noticed a difference between like thinking thank you, or thinking about gratitude, and feeling it in my being. And those are very different things. Do you have any reflection on that?
Absolutely. I think for many, many people, we sort of assume that the locus of awareness is here, Like if I ask someone, well, where is awareness? Where is attention? Can you locate it? A lot of people, they automatically go to the head, But when you shift the center of gravity down into your body and into your heart, and then you have that resonant, felt sense of gratitude, it's just a world of difference. When you're really in that resonant place of gratitude in the body and your soma, it's just resonating with it. You're there, the body doesn't lie. When you feel gratitude, when you really feel gratitude, you are in a very profound state. And of course, then that affects your emotions, it affects your thoughts, it affects your beliefs. But the somatic inquiry is really where the action is, I think.
Has that been a practice for you? Like feeling into that place and then, okay, now I know how to do that. And I know how to feel that. So I want to remember to feel that again. And has it gotten easier for you to go back there more often?
Being a very cerebral oriented guy, I always joke that, that for the first 25 years of my life, I assumed that the reason I had my body was to make my head portable. That was just my whole way of focus. But then when I stumbled into yoga, it was yoga that really kind of shattered me in many ways when I realized that the body is actually a doorway. It's a doorway to presence. The body only lives in the present moment. And then when I ran into Eugene Gendlin and the work of focusing and somatic psychology, this whole recognition of how our issues really are in our tissues. I can try to think my way through something, which is usually like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. But when I can sort of move into the somatic element of it, that's where profound transformation can occur. So it's been so profound for me that it's been primarily what I've done in terms of my teachings and in my offerings, is this whole deep dive into somatic inquiry.
So it makes me question, what's right relationship with the mind? Because the mind is so amazing. It's fascinating what it's capable of doing. But then it also seems like what we're talking about, like it's gotten out of control and we're up in the mind all the time and not experiencing the body. And then also like the mind's ability to focus on different areas of the body and heal. And then the mind is also maybe the doorway towards kind of dropping down, as you say. So what's that right relationship?
Yeah, well, as Ram Dass said, a wonderful servant, lousy master. When the mind tries to establish itself as the ultimate authority, things get really kind of confusing, and pretty messy. But just as you said, it is amazing what the mind can do. You can focus your mind like a laser, and when you're really, really focused, you can really, really get stuff done. You can also take that half step back to the mind and be the witness of what's changing and be the open monitor of what's passing through. And then you can open it even wider, to just explore what it means to rest in presence. So the mind becomes this incredible focalizing tool. And when it's in balance, that's when it gets really interesting. I've always loved that whole, that whole model of at the base of who we are is just pure energy, unrestricted, free-flowing energy, prana, particles and waves of energy, and then that free-flowing energy gets automatically interpreted by the body-mind as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. In Buddhism, that's referred to as Vedana. It's like the feeling tone. And then if we're not aware of the feeling tone and how it registers, then we move into the mind. We move into some reaction. I don't like this. I like this. Ooh, this reminds me of that. And if we're not aware of the thoughts calcify into beliefs. And if we're not aware of how beliefs run our lives, then they form habits. If we're not aware of our habits, that forms our character. If we're not aware of our character structure, that becomes our destiny. So I kind of like that model because with awareness, we can explore on any one of those tiers. You can do an exploration of your character structure and get really, really powerful insights. You can look at your beliefs. You can look at thoughts. And then, as we're often guided to through yoga and meditation, is we're invited to bring ourselves back to that fundamental arising of energy and our relationship to it. And sometimes we can actually be aware of what's arising and not go into the proliferation of stories and thoughts and beliefs and all of that good stuff.
Is that connected with a sense of security, like with the self? We were talking about, my daughter and the way that she is, she doesn't have this self-conscious, aspect to her. So can we reconnect with that kind of like, hey, I'm just this being and I'm just observing what's happening and I'm not taking myself so seriously. I'm not comparing how I rank compared to other human beings, like all of that. Like I'm just existing and I'm just interested in observing what this existence is like.
That pure primal kind of innocence of presence. I think we get glimpses of it. We get memory. We get glimpses of those memories of that innocence. And it's been said that part of the spiritual journey is finding ourselves back in that place of innocence again. We kind of start off with that, just that fresh sense of, the world is simply this field of infinite possibility. And then we start getting identified as a separate self. And then we build our list of aversions and attractions. And we keep investing more and more into who we are as a separate being, which is always fueled with the fear of death. And that's why I think yoga and meditation is oftentimes referred to as dying while alive, because we're seeing our preferences, we're seeing that conditioning, and we're returning again and again to that sense of primal being, as joyful as that can be, and as horrifically painful as that can be too.
Is it a matter of slowing down to a certain degree, like a matter of speed? Something like I question is like these things are happening. This idea of separation, not seeing clearly, has a lot to do with just like the pace that I'm moving at, the pace that my mind is moving at, the pace that I'm moving at physically. So simply by slowing down and kind of checking my speed a little bit, will that open up kind of my world to seeing maybe some glimpses of deeper truths?
Well, I'm curious, when you're with your daughter and you're really, really kind of resonating with her around her experience, what's that like for you?
Yeah, exactly. It's totally a slowing down. And there's this resistance to diving into that place because there's so much to do. And especially right now, more than ever, it's so easy to be distracted. So it's my phone and the screen and this and that, it's a million different things that I can dive into doing. But to just sit down on the floor with her and just watch her, to not have any plan at all, to just be there. And then before I know it, like I've entered her world a little bit and we're playing together, and the right action just manifests naturally from doing that. But I think the original step was kind of, in a way, breaking through that barrier of not wanting to slow down. There was a part of me that didn't want to slow down.
It's so true. It's so true. There's this Zen teacher who says that he meditates for 30 minutes every day, except when he's really busy, and then he meditates for 60. It's like the discipline to slow down. When the mind is this insatiable machine that just wants more. Which is why I imagine it's at times an incredible gift, to have that time with her. And then other times it must be a struggle to put your own mind in neutral and enter into her world.
Yeah. Makes me consider, is it this like running away from reality and truth that we do? And does that have to do with maybe a fear of death, a fear of actually really engaging with the situation that we're in?
Yeah, I think, like I love the model of the kleshas, that, like the very first mistake we make is, avidya, which literally translated as wrong knowledge, is we believe that we're separate, and it must be fascinating for you, to see your daughter start to develop an identity. Like I imagine at some point, I'm this little being, and I keep hearing this name, and suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute, that name is me, and then that formation of like, oh, I'm a separate being, and then we move into gathering more and more evidence that proves that we're a separate being. And then from there we have our lists of likes and dislikes. And I imagine you're watching your daughter start to accumulate her list of preferences and her aversions.
Oh, yeah. Exactly, big time. It's a little sad too. I mean, I accept it. The fact that this conditioning is just a part of nature. There's no way around it. Like she has to go through this process of developing a certain sense of separation and identity, and all of that. But there also is a sadness in watching it happen, just because I love so much her purity of not being in that world. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I remember my brother once said, look, Hannah knows her name now. And I was like, don't do it, Hannah.
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
do it. Go back. It's the beginning of the end. Yeah. So part of it is like, at least through this model of the kleshas, is that we believe that we're separate. And that's the biggest mistake, is we believe that we're separate. Then we start investing more and more energy into who we are as a separate being. Then we have our list of aversions and attractions, which gets longer and longer as life goes by. So that's why I'm always, when you see people in their 80s, their bandwidth of comfort gets so narrow, because for many people, the bandwidth of comfort gets so small because the list of aversions has gotten so big. But then the whole thing is driven by the fear of death, because what if you've spent your entire life pouring all of your energy into investing into who you are as a separate being, and it's all going away? And that's where like part of like waking up to impermanence, it becomes so powerful.
Yeah, actually, I marked down wanting to ask you about the term like waking up or awakening. And just to kind of check in with you and see how you feel about like that term, and if you feel that that's what's happening now, that do you have a sense that more people are waking up, and is this an accurate way to describe kind of what happens in spiritual work? There's a waking up. Yeah.
There's I was just reading some very interesting dialogue around the term waking up versus enlightenment. Like what is the difference? And what I really come to, I love this quote from Pema Chodron. And when she says, she said, I've always been jealous of people who have breakthroughs. She said, I've never had like a massive breakthrough. But when I look back, I see that I'm less stressed and I'm more free. For me, my path has been a path of gradual awakening. And the Buddha, again, I always use the word allegedly around the Buddha because nothing was written down, until, hundreds of years later, 150 years later or something like that. But there's this story of someone asked the Buddha, how do I know I'm making any progress? Fantastic question, because there's, the joke, if you meditate, you'll feel better. You feel your sadness better. You feel your depression better. You feel your anger better. But you also feel your capacity for joy and compassion better as well. But he was asked, how can I tell that I'm making progress? And the response was something along the lines of, are you less caught in greed, hatred, and delusion? And I think that's an incredibly powerful gauge. How much am I more free from the incessant wanting of the mind? Am I more free from hatred, ill will, judgment, blame, all that stuff? And am I more free from confusion about what life and about what reality is? So I really think there is this element of like a progression. I think when I look back, I do feel a lot more free. I feel less anxious, and that just may be age, but it may have something to do with my practice as well.
One thing that I consider is it seems that there's this tendency to not even recognize or realize the amount of progress that I've made. Like, I think the now is so strong a lot of times that we don't even give it credit. Like, we want to be in the now, but like, we are in the now no matter what. Right. And therefore it's like, we don't even acknowledge how much better it's gotten than it was in the past. And what I've learned from being a teacher a lot is that the positive reinforcement is a really powerful tool, actually. So I think about when training myself, like, if I have made some progress, right? If I am less, greedy, then to acknowledge that will help me to make even more progress, on that path. But I guess my question is for you, like, have you noticed this at all? Like, a tendency to forget, how much progress has been made, what it was like in the past, and then also, forgetting that it could always be better. Right? Like, it can always be so much better. Yeah.
And the other thing that happens for many people, and certainly part of my path, is, I oftentimes think that, like, in practice, we get glimpses. We get these glimpses when, like, the sky is clear, and it's like, those are those transcendent moments of happiness, of radiance, of like just feeling the mystery and loving the mystery. And then when those moments fade, they can send you into really deep depression, and for me over the years, and I oftentimes credit my background, particularly in yoga, my decades at Kripalu was, in many ways, it was chasing lights and rainbows. It was using yoga and all the yogic techniques was really powerful ways to change my state, and then having like these transcendent moments followed by a deep sense of loss of that transcendent moment, and then a doubling down in grimness of getting back to my practice. And over the years, I've had some pretty profound, insights into that mechanism. But it is really, really interesting to me of how, when we have these glimpses, they can be really inspiring, but they can also kind of set us up a little bit, for feeling like we're failing. Like, why did I lose it? What did I do to lose it? And I do feel like there's something about the practice, and I find this with depth practitioners, like people who've been practicing for a long time. It's very paradoxical. Because when you're practicing deeply, one analogy, at Kripalu, I used to supervise fasting programs, And, people, they're drinking water, they're drinking juice, they're putting in all this good stuff, they're resting, and then they all go through detox, like their system's getting rested enough where they can start, their body just automatically through its own innate intelligence starts ejecting all these toxins, because now it's strong enough to eject those toxins. And having a strong practice, yoga and meditation is like doing intense detox. So we're throwing off everything that isn't us, because what your practice will reveal is everything that's between you and feeling free. Everything between you and feeling free is up for grabs. So what happens is, and again, this is probably a gross overgeneralization, but what I found is for myself and for many people, you start to practice and it's like these revelations, I'm so relaxed. I feel, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was holding on to that. And now I feel so much more ease, and that, oh my God, I was believing that. And I see now that that's just not true. And who I am without that thought feels so good. And there's sort of the revelations, And then stuff starts coming up that's not so well defined. It's not low-hanging fruit, And this is a lot of where somatic inquiry comes in, because there's something below the line of awareness that rises and then falls and rises and falls again. And it's taking us into our conditioning. And what I've found, and again, for myself, but for many others, is that a lot of that conditioning is pre-verbal. A lot of the stress and the anxiety that we pick up, those tracks are laid in really, really deep. And so on the one hand, you develop more of a witness. You have much more access to non-judging presence, non-judging awareness, non-judging consciousness. But at the same time, you're also sensing what's so deep below the line that's sometimes really challenging to get at, because it's not an intellectual process anymore. It's almost more like an energetic process. So that's sort of a long way of saying, I'm not sure it gets easier, as we go along. I think it gets more nuanced and it gets more challenging as we go along.
Yeah. Seems maybe both of those things at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. And I do think it is both of those things at the same time. And certainly what I notice among people who practice for a good while, that they don't believe their thoughts quite as readily as most people do. There's I think there's some pretty deep humility that comes from someone who's got a pretty rich practice, and more of that instinct to turn toward unpleasant. So much of practice is learning how to get comfortable with discomfort, I think.
It makes me think of our relationship with words too, and thoughts, right? That it almost seems that there's like an addiction here. I don't know if that's the right word, but a huge emphasis on the ability to describe what's happening with language. And I feel like we forget that language was just this construct of man that tries to point at something, but it's not that thing. It's just the signpost directing us at that feeling, let's say. And so my question is like, does that lead to a lot of suffering too? Because I'm again, and put me back up in the mind, because I'm trying to figure out what these things are, even like, below the line, like maybe it doesn't go above the line until I'm able to find the words to describe it, as opposed to just like feeling it. I feel something, I feel some type of pain in the body perhaps. And instead of even putting words to it, I just sit with it and notice what happens.
Yeah, well, you're a writer, so you've invested a lot of your life force into finding words that are accurate and true. And I was struck by a story that Eugene Gendlin told, and he's the founder of focusing, which is basically a very, very powerful approach for for really exploring how your issues are in your tissues. And he really kind of laid the foundation for somatic psychology. Really powerful stuff. But the story that I often like to tell about him is that he finished up his PhD in philosophy and realized he wasn't done. So he was working on a PhD in psychology. And he was at the University of Chicago studying with, oh my gosh, name just slipped right out, Carl Rogers. And so he was given this task: when it comes to like therapeutic technologies, what's the best technique, and what makes for the best therapist? So he observed many hours of people doing kind of inquiry type work in therapeutic situations, and this one moment triggered it for him. And it was this woman who was talking about her relationship with her sister. And she said, "I am so pissed at my sister." And then she closed her eyes. And then she opened her eyes and she said, "No," she said, "I'm disappointed with my sister." And he thought, what just happened? Like, here's the story. I'm pissed. But she closed her eyes. She checked in somatically. The word pissed did not resonate with the feeling. And then when she came out again, it was like then she had the word that resonated with the feeling. So I think, as you were describing so beautifully, like there are times when you just stop the articulation, and really drop into the feeling. This whole phrase, that the body doesn't lie, is a really interesting thing to try on. Like, is it true that like this innate intelligence of the body doesn't lie? And if we can really pause and tune into it, that there's that resonance of truth when it's sort of resonating cellularly, like, as they say, you know it in your gut, you know it in your bones. And that becomes such a powerful part of practice, I think.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, when we have conversations, like we try to do the best that we can to describe what we want to describe, right? And often there's there's that word that's the perfect word for what I'm trying to say. But you can't quite find the word. But you can't just wait, you have to say something.
Right.
So
right.
you pull out whatever the next best thing is there.
Well, it's so interesting because, in neurolinguistic programming, they say we process information through 3 different channels. One is visual. So people who are visual, they tend to think in pictures, so they talk in pictures. Like, oh, can you imagine this? Well, this is how I see it. They talk fast because they have the image and they want to get it across as quickly as possible. And then there are people who are more auditory. They process auditory, and they actually use words like, well, that sounds really good. Or no, that doesn't ring a bell. And then they're the people who are kinesthetic. And it's so interesting. And you can tell a kinesthetic person because, they're slower because they're trying to, tune in. And it's fascinating to me because I tend to move toward the visual. But what I find is if I give myself that permission to slow down, and it can be really challenging, but I actually am tuning in to that resonant felt sense that it takes longer to form, but when it does form, it's can be pretty solid.
I wanted to shift a little bit, because I wanted to ask you about your relationship with animals. So Jonathan is an amazing photographer, and if you get on his email list, he sends out I think a monthly newsletter, and he'll share all these beautiful photographs that he takes in nature. So I know you usually get out early morning, I think, and it's a part of your practice, right? And you're observing different animals. So I'm curious how long you've been doing this and what the effect for you has been, like maybe some things that you've learned from observing animals.
Wow. Well, I grew up on a farm. So there are a couple things there. It got me in the habit of getting up early, but also working with animals has always been kind of a big part of my life. And one thing I found with COVID is, my natural chronotype has emerged. When my body really wants to sleep and when it wants to wake up, which kind of ridiculously is like going to sleep at 8:30 and getting up at 4:30. So that gives me plenty of time to get out there and, be out there when things are waking up. And, it's so interesting to me of how being in nature, just observing nature, observing these unself-conscious animals as they're moving through their life it's so profoundly healing. I know like in ancient Ayurveda, like the prescription for many people was to be in nature, just to remove distraction and be in nature. So I just love observing, and interacting with animals out there because it's such a privilege to be out there. And also it's so impersonal, they could care less about my presence. And, there are times when I do this practice. It's funny because I would do this practice and then I was sharing with my wife, Tara, and then she told me she'd do the same thing. Like I paddle upstream on the Potomac River, which is a pretty intense river. And then I just paddle until I get tired and I float back. And oftentimes I do kind of an open-eyed meditation. And I have this sense of like when I'm floating back sometimes I just think like, what if I wasn't here? What would this be if I wasn't here? And suddenly it just becomes how it's just life happening. It's just happening all by itself. And it's a really beautiful experience of what's referred to in Buddhism as anatta, which is the not self. Like when that separate self is not present or injecting itself into life, like what is that? And that really is that sense of the mystery, is that sense of flow. So to me, that's just deeply, deeply healing. So I was doing that, and then I realized that Tara was kind of doing that same practice kind of spontaneously as, she oftentimes goes and meditates, down by the river in the morning.
How important has it become for you to feel connected, to not feel separate, to tune into this, okay, I am a part of something larger than myself?
It's a paradoxical thing to me because, in fact, I was just writing about this a little while ago. Like when you're really in nature, when you're just out there and you're just connecting with the elements, it's this paradox in that it's a pretty deeply uncaring world. But at the same time, there's a sense of belonging that occurs. And for me, it's like when I can just feel these rhythms of life that are so much more expansive than what's going on in my brain. There's a really profound sense of, I think maybe it's just a connection to reality, that is so healing for me. One of the things I was looking back over a bunch of my images, over the years, and I was really struck by how many of the images, the animals are actually looking right at me. They're not running away. They're not fearful. And I just felt this like this gush of warmth, to not be feared, and to see an animal and to be seen is a really beautiful, it's a beautiful experience. There's this phrase I overuse all the time, having to do with meditation practice, that when these elements arise that are between you and feeling free, maybe it's just that, like that low grade sense of anxiety comes to the surface, or a sense of dread or anxiety about something. And the analogy is like that they are like wild animals at the edge of the woods. That when fear, anxiety, strong emotions arise, if we can see them as wild animals at the edge of the woods, where you can't seduce it in, and you can't chase it and capture it, because that's not going to happen either. But you can let it know you see it. Like when you see a deer in the woods, and it knows that you see it. That establishes this really beautiful, intimate connection with some force, either out there or some force in there, as we're practicing. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. Got a bunch of questions that all want to come up at the same time now. You mentioned this connection to reality. And I'm thinking about that, if that's really what the heart wants the most, to just be in alignment with reality. And maybe that's connected to also what you're saying about of just looking at it, right? Like, so the heart doesn't want us to keep running away from what is. It wants us to turn and face it.
Absolutely. And, as someone said, these aren't my words, but I really come to resonate with them, is how we can view life through like a lens of optimism, and that optimism can be healthy, but there can be a shadow side to the optimism, and we can focus through a lens of pessimism, again, which can have some degree of like clear discernment, but also have a negative built-in negativity bias. And I realized for myself that it's not about being optimistic, and it's not about being pessimistic. It's about being realistic, and I really feel like any spiritual tradition that's worth its salt is a reality-based practice, and that's what keeps pointing to is, what is it that is true, that was true thousands of years ago, that will be true thousands of years from now.
So one of the things that's true for me, has become more and more important, is to acknowledge my limitations of knowing. Right. So it's like the humility aspect for me that is very, very real, that I don't know, and that it's okay not to have opinions. And I notice a lot of suffering that comes both externally, I witness it, and also within myself, from thinking that I need to have an opinion about everything, or that I can be a judge of like the unfoldment of humankind and like the planet. Like I can know that in any kind of real term.
Yeah, when you sent me the invitation to, for this podcast, you had a place for me to put my bio, and I wrote down, last year, foolish monk, this year, no change. There is something I've found about really embracing that, really embracing the not knowing. It's just in Zen, they call it don't know consciousness. Like, is it possible to really just embrace that, and yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you ask the question a lot, like, what is between me and feeling free? Maybe what is between me and something. I've really kind of taken that, and I ask that in many different ways. But that's one thing that's clear to me, that's between me and feeling free is the knowing, right? Like when I feel like I need to know and need to do a certain number of things, I'm not feeling free. But if I am really like, I don't know, and I'm okay with that, I feel free, I feel light, it's fine.
There's a teacher, actually, both you and I know in the Kripalu tradition, who has a great, because we were talking about so this awakening, enlightenment thing, what is it? And he said, this is so simple, but I think oftentimes the best truths are the most simple. He said, what if it's just the absence of desire? And I keep coming back to that, like, wow, so who am I in the absence of desire? And in those moments, when you're without desire about being someone who knows, that really that's freedom. It may just be a glimpse, but that is freedom. And I think it's about stringing those little moments of glimpses together.
It brings up another word for me, and that word is mature, which is a word that I'm actually very interested in. What does it mean to be mature? And I would say, actually, not having desires, or maybe having less desires, is connected with maturity.
I love that word maturity. It shows up a lot in Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy. That because when we sort of start off, and a great example is faith. That because sort of childish faith is magical thinking. Of like, well, if I just think happy thoughts, everything will be okay. Then there's another level of faith, which is, tell me what to believe, and I'll believe it because I want to belong to this tribe, But then mature faith is, for example, if you hear everything born of causes and conditions is subject to change, it's actually embracing skepticism and saying, wait a minute, is that true? And then rigorously investigating. And then if that's true, that's mature faith. And so it's this beautiful element of like embracing skepticism and understanding that part of the flowering of that is that sense of mature faith. And it's something, I guess, because I just got on the Medicare this year, so the whole idea of maturity is something that's really playing through my consciousness these days. And just recognizing that, over years of practice and just years of life, like what that maturing process I find to be so interesting.
Yeah. And there's like a resistance for me, like multiple selves, the resistance towards moving into the realm of mature, like the old self, the other self doesn't really want to go there and investigate. Okay, like what does it really mean to be mature?
I got a great reframe from that. I was on a meditation retreat. This is, 30 years ago. But a really intensive meditation retreat, and I just at some point on one of the breaks I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I had this moment of like, sort of like seeing my image looking back at me as like an older guy, like in my 60s, like balding but really, really happy. And it was kind of a startling moment, like seeing my face aged, and balding, but getting like this guy was really, really happy. And I just thought, I'm going to totally anchor that. Like, what if getting older means I'm just more and more happy and more free? And then not long ago, I was brushing my teeth, looking in the mirror, and I realized, oh my God, I'm that guy. I'm now that old guy looking back at myself when I was 30. And I am so much more happy. And so why not view aging, as the possibility of being less caught in greed, less caught in hatred, and less caught in confusion. That's how I'm wiring it for myself, and so far, I hope so good.
Yeah, that's not how I'm trying to wire it too. And I think that's where the skepticism comes in a little bit. Because, I'm skeptical about the notion to be sad or depressed about my aging and to, oh man, it was so great when I was 20, What? I don't know. That doesn't,
Yeah,
that doesn't do it for me. I don't know. I'm not embracing the flow of time. I'm not, I feel like I'm moving away from reality instead of turning to face what reality is, I
was in the car once, and I remember like when I had to stop running, and seeing someone running going like, oh man, I used to be able to do that, And it was not that long ago, maybe just like a year ago. I'm driving along and I see someone running, and my response was like, "Isn't that great? They can still do that," Because we're all in this together, We're all in this together.
One kind of new thought for me, actually, in the last few days, or insights, I should say, it's been like this tendency to want to experience everything. Like, a desire to just, I don't know, to have so many experiences, do so many different things in the time that I have. And then I realized that, like, whoa, like, I haven't really been considering like what my lane is, and considering the fact that, like, in this time of life, like dealing with the finality of it all, like, I'm not going to be able to experience everything. And that's okay. And kind of this more peaceful clarity has come over me, and just say, like, that's totally fine. Now just decide like what your intention is for your lane of this life. So I'm kind of excited about that insight a little bit. It's new for me.
It's interesting. There have been studies, as people age, how, like, as much as, like, pain and illness is part of aging, that there's something very paradoxical in that a lot of people, as they age, get happier. And part of the theory is that part of the reason why they're happier is they actually have less choice, and having less choice is kind of calming. Like, it just hit me the other day, like, the window for my NFL career is probably closing pretty quickly here.
Just hit you the other day.
Yeah. But it's like, like we used to say back in the ashram, no car problems, no relationship problems. So there is something about like, oh, these are the cards I've been dealt. This is what I've got. And there can be a real, not only just a coming to peace with that, but there can be more and more of an embracing of what's here.
Yeah, the no car, no problem thing makes me think about, just a simple life and what that means a little bit, and the way our culture tends to operate, and the messages that we're giving out. And one thing that I feel very kind of strongly about, I would say, is a call for more of a simple life, to celebrate simple living, right? Because there's not room for everyone to be super wealthy and famous. So that's only setting that as the standard for success is only going to leave so many people depressed. And depressed people is not good for anyone to have a bunch of depressed people around. But there's plenty of room for everyone to have a simple life that feels okay and fine. Yeah.
It was Werner Erhard who said that the quickest way to be happy is to choose what you already have. And it's such a profound statement, but absolutely, I've certainly found that for myself, that the more I simplify, the more bandwidth I have for presence. And why I like to say that, like, nothing material is going to make you happy, with the exception of a few specific Apple products.
Okay, final question then, on the lines, like the role of humor and lightheartedness on this path. Like, how important is it? Recently, I'm trying to engage my days and look for any opportunity to laugh. And it's been a game changer. So, right, it can be kind of like heavy, and I do love the seriousness. There's no problem with it. I think you feel similarly, like no problem with that. But also to laugh and to feel light and all that. How important is that?
Oh boy, I know both you and I have been influenced through the Kripalu tradition. But there's something that Swami Kripalu said, and Swami Kripalu was this amazing yogi. He died just before I moved in the ashram, in the early 80s. But by all accounts, this guy who practiced silence for 19 years and 10 hours a day of meditation, and, touched into nirvikalpa samadhi states, and, pretty amazing character. He does one line where he said, "Seriousness is a crime in the court of God." I thought, whoa, I'm going to run with that one.
And you have been running with that one.
I have been running with that one, yeah. Because it's true. In the absence of comparison, in the absence of judgment, in the absence of desire, there's joy, there's discovery, there's creativity, there's embracing a paradox, and that's where the action is, I think.
Yeah. I think our relationship with death is kind of connected to this too, right? Like it's been challenging, but to shift, because I'm really turning towards reality. Nature is saying, okay, it's not such a big deal. Like things are born and they die all the time, but we tend to treat it as like, okay, again, we know that this is awful. Well, how do I know that that's awful? How do I really know that? So there's, for me at least, still a lot of kind of growth in that relationship with death, but I'm investigating it. And I think it leads towards this lightheartedness, because I'm not like super serious about what happens. Just this is the Leela, the play of the universe that we're engaged in.
And kind of like back to that sense of the separate self. I know when I went through my parents dying, and really kind of caught in the, sort of the tragedy and the hurt of that. And then realizing, it's so cliche to even say it out loud, but this recognition of like, hey, guess what? I'm not the first person to lose a father, like in the Tonglen practices, other people feel this too, like, wow, so this is the human experience of, you lose the people you love, you lose parents, you lose friends. And this is not unique to me, and here I am now on Medicare. Is like, well, what's the next big transition? Oh, well, guess what? I'm not going to be the first person to slip out of my body here. Mm-hmm. And there's something, I don't know if we call it comforting, but there's something real about that I'm beginning to digest as well.
Jonathan, thank you so much. This time is really valuable for me. I said before, I consider you one of my teachers, and kind of just discovering you, I feel like was a great moment in my life. So thank you for being who you are and for joining me today for this conversation. I know you're doing a lot of different things. If someone would like to kind of follow up and check out more of your work, I know you have the podcast, YouTube channel, website. What's the best way? Just go to the website, or what would you say?
Yeah, first just to say thank you. And what a bright light. You're such a bright light, and I've always enjoyed every moment I've had hanging out with you. So thank you for that. Yeah, my stuff is kind of offered freely. I'm very influenced through the Buddhist tradition of teachings are priceless, so don't charge. So I've got a podcast, just Jonathan Foust, and my website, and not all. I don't have Instagram or anything like that, but there's Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a joy to be able to share these practices. What a great life. I feel so blessed.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this content and think others might as well, please feel free to share and subscribe.